What's up, Liron here. Thank you for joining me in another video. In this one, we're going to do something we don't do as often, and that is a master study. So this painting is based on a Rob Candy painting, and he's a really good artist. You should check out his work. And this, what he's a master of is simplifying, turning a complex scene into a simple scene that produces a beautiful result in watercolor. And you're going to see how I do this from start to finish. Now, one quick note, my Frustration Free Watercolor course is out, so if you want to learn how to let go and really enjoy watercolor painting and paint loosely, be sure to check it out in the description box below. And with that being said, let's get started with the process. So I find these studies to be incredibly useful, and I want to show you how I approach one of these. Sorry that I already did the drawing part, but what you have to realize for this stage is that simplicity is key. Okay, you want to keep this as simple as you can. I love artists who simplify things for the viewer and also for us other artists and colleagues, so that we can use their work as a master study and actually rely on something that's fairly simplistic. I'm going to use my own colors for this one. So French Ultramarine, some Quinacridone Rose, and Cadmium Yellow. The sky needs a bit more blue in them, so let's blue it up. And as long as I use enough water, it's going to be fine. I'm going to add some more water to it. I barely have an angle at the paper, but that's fine. You don't always have to have one. And I'm going to start just covering it up with an initial wash here. I'm going to switch dramatically onto the this kind of cadmium yellow and cover everything up. Okay, we're covering everything up, top to bottom. This is going to be the color of our highlights, in fact, so I don't have to worry too much about that. And as we get to the bottom, I'm going to start playing around with some reds. And as you can see in the reference photo, again, this artist is amazing, Rob Candy, and I do believe it's his work from what I've seen on the webpage. But if I make a mistake, you'll have to correct me and excuse me, because sometimes it's hard, especially with unsigned works. But the way he simplifies the colors is really beautiful in my opinion and artistic taste. And also he has this, I may have exaggerated it a tad bit, but he has this nice gradual move from blue to red to kind of purple, yellow. He has a bit of it all, really. And I wonder if I want to pour in just a bit of water here. Let's see what happens. Sometimes, again, I'm willing to try out something I know may not work in order to learn something new from it. So what I'm going to do now, and hopefully this will dry again lighter, I can do this. I can just spray some water on it if it seems too dark, add some water to it, and that'll make it a little lighter inevitably. So what I'm going to do now is allow this a few seconds to dry, come back and start adding in the details. The next wash is going to finish everything up because it's a fairly simply structured scene. There's a lot of cleverness in how simply he's structured it. So it's not an easy one, but it's a simple one. So let me show you once this dries. So this is dried beautifully and also quite light, so I'm pleased with it. Now it's important to remember it didn't fully unbuckle. That should not be a problem, really. So you can work on it like that. Some people prefer to wait until it's fully dry, and that's perfectly fine as well. So let's start working on that background. Now notice how it's one big shape with a couple of details for hinted boats in the background. So let's do that, starting from left to right here. And you want to make sure to mix enough, not like I have here. You need more because that is important. It's not that small of a wash, so let's do that kind of thing. Now there's a bit more yellow there, a little bit more warmth around the middle of the shape. And while I'm building the shape up, I'll already focus on blending in some edges as it's still simple while the wash is still wet, adding a couple of details for these boats in the background. And let's use this smaller brush to blend in some edges with the background like so. A bit of water, coming back, just touching it in some select areas. Go back to some more blue and move on with the shape. Now here you have to really notice the actual shape. So I'm painting around the highlight on that boat that's closer to us, and I'm just following the drawing I made. I'm happy that it's actually a good representation of what I need here. I made sure that the drawing will be a good indication of the scene. And here you really want to blend it all as he does here. If you want to make a study that's kind of loyal to the reference. Now let's switch to that smaller brush to get in those final details around the bottom of this wash. Kind of like that, a bit more blue because that's water already. So once you put this red in, it's very hard to get rid of it in the mix. But in any case, here's some blue for that dock. There's actually a dock coming through here, I believe. A couple of details here and there just to connect it with the wash that's above, like so. And we're pretty much done with that part at the back. Now I'm going to switch to a bit of a cooler yellow, green, because blue, sorry, because this is what I see in the reference photo. And I'm just going to start making my way through while leaving what's, again, a highlight. Now, a big part of what he does is dropping in those darker lines, wet and wet. So I'm going to do that. So a bit of purer blue. And I'm just going to put it in while this is still wet. And again, watercolor is such a random medium in some ways that you can't really expect to get the exact same result as the subject of your study. Do your best. Try and get it to look right. But don't feel too bad if you didn't get the colors right exactly. In fact, you should not strive to get them right because it is, again, it has a lot of aspects of randomness to it that are outside of our control, and that's perfectly fine. Leaving a highlight for this boat down under. Now I'm going to start adding in again some darks, wet and wet, so a bit of a dark here. And I like how some parts are preserved and some parts just kind of blend in. That's a really beautiful look in my opinion. Again, the variety of edges, that's really an inherent quality of watercolor that I like to put some emphasis on. Now let's connect it to the shadow underneath, or the reflection rather. This is fairly light and I'm going to connect it while it's still wet, obviously, to keep things moving as much as I can. It dried a bit, but that's fine. We're done with this shape of this boat right through here. And we're pretty much done with that. Now, while I have this nice little yellowy color, I'm going to start adding in that dock in the background. It's a bit muted. Actually, there's a lot of subtleties in this painting that are easy to miss. You may think it's simpler than it is, but there's a lot of subtlety within the colors and values and how they all mix together. He actually mixed these boats with the dock, so I'm going to try and do that with the boat on the right here. There's a lot of subtleties here that you want to pay attention to. Let's mix this boat with it. So a bit of that same blue, phthalo blue. Sorry, you can't see the mixing. Let's do it here. And I'm just going to touch and allow these two to mix. Breaking those, just all of the straight lines is a really important, I think, approach, because it just makes the painting fun, I guess, more fun. It reads better in many cases, but just more fun, more fluid. That's what watercolor is all about. And you can paint in whichever way you want, really, but I think it's a good idea to make the most out of the inherent qualities of the medium, which are wet and wet, lots of flow. So here we go. Now I'm going to start adding in some of those darker details while it's still wet. Once again, I'm going to need a bit of a thicker mix here. So like this. There's this window here. I'm going to add some more details to it later on. This part here where the dock and the boat touches the water, that's really important as well. I'm going to darken this up a little more. Lost some of the things to wet and wet here, which is fine. And these parts are done. They're finished. You don't need to do anything with them really. So that's a fun little way of working that's fairly fast as well. So now we get to some other details in these boats in the foreground. So let's start actually with this one at the far edge. And for these kinds of shapes, what I love to do is use a bit of a muted color. You don't want this to be too felt in the painting because it's the side. You don't want it to take too much attention. So I'm just using a bit of a warm wash. I'm changing it up a bit from my reference here. a bit of a warm wash here, and then I'm going to reflect it with some blue underneath, okay? And hopefully you can see this well. While it's still wet, that's very important. And you want to get the right feeling in terms of the edges of the reflection. See here this crisscross pattern that's so indicative of these water scenes, and then a bit of a ripple there. There's a person there, so let's add that person. A bit of red. I'm going to add it all alla prima. Then his body is kind of a muted blue, and he sits inside the boat. And for this edge, I'm going to use a bit more of that, these two reds actually, with a bit of darker blue, and get that in. I know it's a small detail, and hopefully you can see it well, like so. It's a rowboat, so I could add kind of an imaginary row here. Hopefully that makes sense. Now, I want to do also this kind of a wet and wet, well, it's still somewhat wet edge here. That can really add a lot, and a bit of a darker section in the water, okay? Now I'm starting at some point to diverge from the reference, and I'm just kind of doing what I want. That's great. If you feel like that, embrace it. At some point, even when you're doing a study of someone else's artwork, you're just going to want to do things your way, which is fine. I'm going to mix two of my blues into this kind of color and start adding in the details for this boat. This should be a little lighter, so I'm coming back with water, spreading it out like that. It's a fairly complex painting. Even though it seems simple, there's quite a lot of details here with the boats that you want to make sure you get right. Now a bit of that yellow, relatively pure. Sorry if I move the camera a bit. And I'm just going to place it in here, let the two mix. Now I'm going to use a rather muted mix for the bottom of the boat. And again, I'm kind of keeping it warm near the bottom of the boat, but then cooler in the water itself. And I'm letting it all mix with the inside of the boat as well, just for fun. Now again, for the reflection, I'm switching it up to a cooler blue. Still quite muted. Nothing is really too striking in this scene in terms of the colors, except for perhaps the initial wash and the yellows and all of that. Like this random pattern for the ripples. That's a beauty. I love these kinds of random patterns. A bit of ripples to the sides because the water is fairly still. And then here's the key part. You want to put in, again, while this is still wet, some of those darker details up top and in the connection with the water. Okay, that can really help with conveying the shape. And then you want to reflect some of that here if you can, so a bit of darker reflections around the edge. Okay, that's an extra. It's not always easy to get that impression, and besides, this boat isn't the main focal point, but we'll try to get it at least to some extent. We're done with this. Now for the main boat, and this is fairly tiring, I have to say, a boat after another boat after another boat. It's not an easy painting really, but if you want to challenge, it's a good one. The drawing stage is very simple, so that's good. And you notice how slowly but surely I'm building the scene up. A bit more warmth into this shape. And then connect it with this area here that has to be a bit darker, like this. And then we have the edge of the boat with a bit of a gentle highlight. That's beautiful. Now I'm going to start with a very dark blue. Let's do it the other way around, not wet and wet. First we'll start with a very strong blue. This shape I should close off. First I'm starting with a very strong blue, and then I'll blend it using the rest of the paint I'm adding. Messed up the shape a bit, but you notice nothing you can't fix really if you catch it early enough. And that's something I will talk more about in the next videos, but a lot of it can be fixed. So here we go. And finally the reflection. This time it's fairly darker. And again, I don't know if that's really how it was in the original view, but I'm doing the study here, so I am trying to follow it to some extent, okay? So we're working on second-hand impression, actually, and that's a really good way of learning. You don't want to rely just on that. You want to, at some point, try out your own things, but it's just a good way of getting started, and I wholeheartedly recommend it. So here we go, bottom of the boat. Now to bring out some of the shape of the boat more clearly, we're going to strengthen this part. I'm going to add a bit of a shadow here, darken this up a little bit, and mainly I want to add this dark section, okay? So you may need a lot of paint at this stage, so here we go to overpower the wetness. Maybe a bit of a line here, but we're pretty much done, and I'm going to add some more ripples to the water here, a bit lighter. And you see, this is all just a matter of building it up slowly, taking your time, working in the sections that allow you to split efforts. So let's now go for a more brown feeling for the dock itself. So a bit of yellow, a bit of red, and again, this yellow is very dominant, so you have to use it carefully. Or use a different yellow. If you don't like a color, switch it. It doesn't really matter. Again, colors aren't as important as people make them out to be. I'm going to finish this dock rather fast, like so. Add a bit of the ripples under the these parts of these wooden poles that kind of meet it at the water, but then I'm going to connect it immediately while it's still wet. Notice how fast I have to sometimes work here, and how I can slow down at some stages. So it's really a mix of the two skills. And it's hard to sometimes bring this patience into play, but you have to do it. And it's sometimes hard to bring the speed into play. So you have to find out what's more challenging for you and work on that. A bit of water here to lighten it up, like so. Then onto the reflection. That's also fairly light, really. But here's where it gets interesting. Here there's a lot of this kind of pure, warm, fiery red that we haven't seen in the other boat. So I'm really going to grab a bit of both here and try and get it right. So let's go. A bit of that strong red up top here. A bit to the back there. Use it for the shadows, then use a bit of blue for the shadows to contrast with that red. And I do want to add a bit more, so let's get some more of it in and really bring out this front part of the boat. Then bring out the separation where it meets the water, as we did several times here. There's a reflection I want to connect at this stage of this pole or whatever that is. I just need it to be lighter. And like so. And again, notice how tiring this can be. But try and enjoy it and take your time whenever possible. I'm going to add right now a couple of transparent brush strokes. I don't usually do this in my work this way, but this is a master study, so I'm going to try and do what I see this master has done. Still keeping it fairly simple, okay? These are relatively wet brush strokes, brush marks, so kind of like this. And we're good, just to indicate some movement within the water. And I think with that we're almost done. Let's add this tree here in the background, a bit of this yellow, a bit of a French ultramarine or whatever, phthalo, maybe more French ultramarine, muted down with some red. Let's see what we got. Yeah, so we got a nice little brown to hint at a tree here to the side. Whatever this tree means or meant for the artist, who knows, but we're putting it here and cutting through the the light background. It looks really beautiful, so kind of like that. What else? We can just patch things up a little with some dry brush, mainly blues, just to get back some of these darks on the boat, on the base of the boat. But this is pretty much 90% done. What's left really is to add the masts. That'll hint at some kind of a thing that will cut through the horizon line. Now I'm prone to messing these up, so you'll have to forgive me. It's still hard for me to draw these vertical lines, but I don't want to rotate the paper because that's sometimes uncomfortable for the viewer. So let's just go for it and see what happens. So we got one in perfectly. Very proud of myself for this one. Let's get a mini one here. Let's get another one coming at the back here. This one is purely compositional. There isn't really anything back there, but it will help us just to better see the scene for what it is, a boat scene, a beautiful boat scene. Bit of ripples here at the back. Again, I don't usually do these things dry brush, but this time I was like, okay, let's give it a try. Bit of a reflection for this one. And when I look at it, I don't see too much that's missing. So I think if I cannot add anything to improve it, I'll stop. That's how I work. That's how I roll. If what I'll add won't improve, I stop. Okay? So let's do one last brush stroke here. Not gonna sign this one because it's a study, but hopefully this makes sense. And hopefully you enjoyed seeing the process. Now let's wrap it up. So thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed seeing the process from start to finish. Once again, apologies for not having the drawing stage. I was actually not planning on filming, and then I decided to film. And I hope you can see how a simple drawing can really allow the paint to do its own thing and really shine. Instead of doing a too detailed of a sketch and then getting lost in the details, sometimes the pencil sketch has a huge significance in making the painting better perception-wise, okay? Because you know what to paint and how to paint. I just want to remind you that my Frustration Free Watercolor course is out, so check it out in the description box below. If you want to be able to let go and enjoy the painting process, you really want to check that out. And one last kind of message, I'm actually, at the time of you watching this, I'm on my way or already in New York, okay? I'm going to spend the entirety of October almost in New York, but I filmed some videos in advance for you because I wanted you to enjoy them. So that means that I may also post fewer videos, maybe 2 a week, maybe 1 a week, I'm not sure yet. But in any case, I hope you enjoyed this one, and I will see you again in the next one.